Hello, everyone. This is Jim Johnson, and I want to welcome you to Peak Performance for the Technical Professional. Your program facilitator has already briefed you on what the program is about and also introduced you to the chapters in the book that we'll be going along with in this program. What I want to do is do some short video segments for you that are related to the program and give you some other things to consider. In this segment, we're going to talk about two things. One is Davy Crockett. The other one is the Texas State Attorney General and the Philip Morris Company, a company that manufactures cigarettes. First, Davy Crockett. Many people remember Davy Crockett, and they might have been aware of him not only from their study in school, that sort of thing, but also television shows and movies that were made about him. As a matter of fact, one of those television shows pretty far back was so popular that it's a safe bet that every elementary school child probably could sing you at least the opening lines to the theme song for the television show Davy Crockett. The television show starred a fellow by the name of Fess Parker, and one of the things that he wore as his character was a coonskin cap. And all these kids that I'm telling you about had their own coonskin caps, and they could sing at least the first part of the song that went like this. Davy, Davy Crockett, king of the wild frontier. He was born on a mountaintop in Tennessee. He killed him a bear when he was only 3.
I love that. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us again. This is Did You Know, the ESCO HVAC show. And we are so honored to be spending time with author, educator, mentor, friend, Jim Johnson. How are you, sir?
Doing fine.
Now, we're going to dive a little deep into just understanding how well we're performing. You know, many times we talk about that transition from technician into educator and the additional tools that we need to pick up. And there are a lot of them, but they're not always physical tools. Like Ty, remember when we made that transition and came into the classroom and we had our tools, we had the things that we liked. And then all of a sudden, some of the new tools were things like communication and documentation and performance and things that they weren't tools that we were comfortable with. They weren't things that we had gotten used to. And we're kind of a hands-on group, I think. You know?
I agree.
So our new toolkit, as we start becoming educators and professionals, has a lot of new tools that we may not have encountered along the way. And Jim is here to help us learn some of these tools and give us resources to continue to be better at what we do, especially as educators. And educators, if any of you are with us today, definitely let us know in the chat your name, where you're joining us from. We love seeing the community that we have here. If you have any questions and comments along the way, definitely let us know too, because there's so much information we won't get through it all. We're actually going to jump through a couple different curriculums and talk about some different perspectives today. And it's hard telling where we end up, honestly. Jim, you want to introduce yourself and let everyone know your history in the industry?
Wow, history. Well, that goes back pretty far. Actually, my first, I could say, entry into the field was actually in junior high school.
Really?
Yeah, I was very fortunate, I think, because of that. My father was in the refrigeration business, specifically appliances, and he worked for a wholesale distributor. And back in those days, this is going to sound a little strange, but back in those days, technicians were encouraged to moonlight. That
Really?
sounds very strange, but that's the way it worked back then, because they didn't have factory warranty and they didn't have revenue coming in from service. And the way it worked was that wholesale distributors, when they sold a refrigerator to a retailer, then what happened was that retailer sold it to a consumer.
Yeah.
And if there was any problem with it, the warranty was not stood by the manufacturer. It was the wholesaler that stood it.
Last point of sale.
So my father worked for one of those wholesalers.
Okay.
And of course, he handled any warranty work. But the other part of it is that, like I said, they encouraged moonlighting, because once the warranty period expired and people had a problem with their refrigerator, they only knew to call the wholesaler. And of course, the wholesaler was not in the service business. So what they would do is they would say, look, we'll pass this on to the fellow who can handle this, and he won't see you during the day because he can work at night on your stuff. And that's how I kind of got started into the business. And he would matter of fact, it was really interesting because they would take his calls during the day and put him on his time card slot so that when he clocked out at the end of the day, he got his service calls for that evening that he would. And so, and this was back in the day, it was quite a while back when things were very, very simple. We're talking even some of the stuff that I worked on was even old latch door refrigerators that had been around for a while, that sort of thing. So
Sure.
that's how I got started in junior high school. And the simple electrical stuff on the refrigeration side. And then, of course, getting into working with refrigerators, which, by the way, what followed that was when other kids had a paper route, I didn't do it that way. What I did was I made a trip to the Salvation Army, and when refrigerators failed, that's what people did. They gave them away
Mhm.
to
Sure.
Salvation Army.
Absolutely.
So I would go down to the Salvation Army and look them over, and I would give them $1 a piece for those used refrigerators. And we'd put them in a truck, take them to my garage, and sometimes they'd take 2 refrigerators and make one good one out of it, or that sort of thing.
We know that theme, don't we, Ty?
Very well.
We talk about that.
And then what was left over, I tore it all apart and I sold. But back in those days, we had stainless steel and things. We had a lot of copper,
A lot
you
of
know.
good crap.
So that was my little side business that I ran all the way through high school. Actually, that did that sort of thing. And then when I got out of high school, I went to work for General Electric Company. And in General Electric Company, I really didn't do a lot of refrigeration. I was more just a motor person working in the speed variator division, they called it. Because I could read wiring diagrams and because I understood components and meters, they stuck me in what they call final assembly. And that was these speed variators were running motors that were, oh my gosh, as big as the desk you're sitting at. And
Absolutely.
and the panels were like 4 by 8, and they were full of contactors and switches and conduits and
Yeah.
wires and everything. And my job was to run them through on the last go around and make sure that they operated okay before they got shipped out. So, and once I got done with a stint on that, then I went full time into the appliance service business. That's how I got started, and then went from there after I was in the appliance business for a while. And went into the HVAC side, and that's how I got into it.
There's a lot of people will know your content from the HVAC side, but not realize how much content you actually have on the appliance repair. So for those who haven't been on our store, you need to hop in there and take a look, as well as the e-learning network. So we actually have some of those appliance repair courses in the e-learning network. So there's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of additional content out there because there are programs that do work with a variety of different refrigeration equipment, and so some of those small appliances are an excellent place to introduce people into refrigeration because you
Yep.
can recognize it. I mean, Ty and I have been working on a heat pump book, and he starts out talking about a refrigerator to help people get the principle of refrigeration and what that actually is. So, a lot of fantastic material in that.
Well, that's that simple explanation. I'm all for that, by the way. If you're going to tell somebody how a heat pump works and it helps for them to understand a refrigerator, something that they're familiar with, something that they're not afraid of, that
Mm,
sort of thing, or they're not, it doesn't confuse them. And I when I ran the service calls as a refrigeration technician and be in people's homes, I would have a tendency to even explain to them how the refrigeration system worked. I would tell them,
very
look,
cool.
we don't put the cold into your refrigerator. We take the heat out. And they would be
Right.
like, what? Well,
What?
how does that work? And so I would often spend 30 minutes fixing the refrigerator and another 30 minutes telling them how it worked, that sort of thing.
So you were born into peak performance. Kind of came natural to you.
Well, yeah, like I guess right down to it because my dad was, he not only worked during, and not only on the week, not only evenings when we went out and did some repairs, he also covered like several counties, from Pennsylvania, and we would travel every Saturday to different appliance stores, and they would store up all of their old refrigerators in a room, and we'd go in and get them all fixed up so they could do the resale on them. So yeah, I guess you could say I was born into being very busy.
I'd like to have that garage today, wouldn't you, Ty?
Absolutely.
Well, let's talk a little bit about peak performance. It's a new curriculum, a product that we carry at ESCO. And if someone is looking at it, they might go, okay, that's not the that's not the type of equipment that I'm teaching on, and they might go past it not realizing exactly what
Right.
peak performance is. And so we're going to jump in today, and I guess the first question is, what is peak performance?
Well, peak performance, if you want to make it simple, you could say that it's about soft skill development for technicians. It's for, and we understand that technicians work with their hands. Technicians focus on problems. Technicians focus on making things work again. And they get so focused on that that sometimes their soft skills are not what we'd like them to be. Dealing with the customers, making sure, that the customer understands what they're getting, what they're paying for is a big deal.
Sure.
And peak performance, let me just tell you where the name came about, the peak thing, P-E-A-K is what I mean to say.
Mhm.
Peak performance is, the P stands for professional, and the E stands for striving for excellence, and the A stands for taking action and using their knowledge. That's where the key is. The K is to do the best job they can do. So that's where that's where the name comes from. Now, the very roots of this whole program goes way back when I was teaching HVAC after about 10 years, and I made the transition into becoming a department chair. Well, when I made the transition to becoming a department chair, that meant that I didn't teach so many technical subjects anymore. My responsibility, part of that became, how do we prepare our graduates to get hired? And so what I had to work with and develop some on my own was basically a program where we would teach people about how the proper way to write resumes and be able to do interviews properly and things like that, and get hired. So what grew out of that simple thing about how do you get hired, how do you get your job, became, once you get the job, how do you keep it? And it's not just doing the technical things right.
Yeah.
How do you work well with people? How do you become an individual who understands, personal growth is something that you need to be doing on a regular basis, so basically that's how that whole program came about. Now it's grown into what you've got up on the screen there now, that we talk to people about, first of all, if you're going to be a success in business, if you want to think about it that way, because we are in business, just because we happen to run service calls doesn't mean it doesn't have to do with business.
No.
How do you work and make sure that you're always setting goals for yourself, so you're always growing? You're not getting stagnant. That's really what it's all about there. The first part of it there, and the one, that's just one of the tools for success, is setting goals. Okay. The other one is, taking a business approach to what we do and understanding. As a matter of fact, one of the things that we worked often with, and I still do today, is that often when people go to work for somebody, they look at the owners as being something different, something away from them somehow. And that's not the case. The owners are basically in a business relationship with the technicians who go out to do the work.
Absolutely, they are.
And likewise, the technicians are in a business relationship with the company that they work for. And as a matter of fact, we've got a new audio article posting on the e-learning network soon that basically focuses on that. And what it is it's about making sure that you understand that you're actually, even though you don't own part of the business, you are basically in the business with your employer, because the work you do generates a profit. And not only that, but generates the amount of revenue that it takes just to keep you there.
Yeah.
So that you can keep doing that. So that's basically that's kind of a little bit of history about how peak performance came about. Now, what it is now is for instructors who want to implement a soft skills training program into their curriculum. We have the textbook, which is the textbook itself, which is 8 chapters. And then based on that 8-chapter book, we have 6 video segments along with a facilitator guide and a 9-section PowerPoint system, so that you can take students basically in 9 weeks through, here's how you begin to think about being a professional and using your soft skills, to developing more about how to communicate with people, how business works, and all those things that follow that all the way through there to the end of the program. So that's what matter of fact, I do have, we might as well just show you this. This is the facilitator resource guide, which when you get the facilitator package, a copy of the textbook comes with it, along with the hard copy of the facilitator resource guide, and then of course also the PowerPoint and all the other resources are also in an electronic format so that you can use them.
Well, the nice thing about building a facilitator resource, Ty, you and I, so many times when we're looking at curriculum, we have educators that'll have a curriculum for a classroom and they learn the curriculum. Like say we got a book, right? And we release a book, the educator gets comfortable with that book. One of the things we'll get is I'd still like to be able to be a little bit better than the book. I mean, I need to know this stuff so well that when somebody asks me a question about it, I have additional content as my resources that I can back up this conversation. And so that's really what we're talking about with the facilitator guide is adding that additional that content into the conversation. I mean, Ty, when we think about how many technicians leave the industry within the first couple of years of getting into the field. One of the questions that we're asked all the time is, why do they leave? And unfortunately, we don't answer that too often. We don't get the response back because once they've left, that we typically don't have that opportunity to get reinforcement, to get feedback from them. And I think about, well, how many times is it just the fact that they haven't been prepared for what that work life looks like when they get out there? Yeah. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the curriculum, what we're actually diving into. Right. What can we
There's a lot to unpack if you go through the whole thing here. Like you got up there, barriers to personal and professional growth, false beliefs. And let's just talk about that one for just a couple minutes. And I always like to think about it from the perspective of how does someone perceive what they say when and I know this is going to sound a little bit odd, but what do you say when you talk to yourself?
Where did I put that tool?
Ooh, boy, I don't know if I want that.
Well, here's the thing. People do it all the time. And of course, having worked with, I can't count the number of students that I've worked with over the years in both in my community college work and also in trade school. But here's the thing. When people talk to themselves, very often they wind up sabotaging themselves because of the way they talk to themselves. Let me just put it this way. Let's talk about it this way. Let's say that you have what we call P words or I words, just to get started on this, okay? Here's your P words for you. Permanent, personal, and pervasive. Let's just list those there, okay? Now, what about impermanent, impersonal, and isolated, okay? So those are the 6 terms we're going to talk about. And here's the deal. Have you ever really thought about the idea about whether somebody's optimistic or pessimistic, or whether they have a positive approach to things, or whether they have a negative approach to things? We all think about that. Right. And here's the thing. If somebody has an event that happens to them, and it's a negative event, let's just say things don't go right, are they going to focus on P words about that or I words? Let me just go back over them again. Let's say something doesn't go right. And instead of looking at it from a positive perspective, that person says, well, there I go again. That's what happens to me all the time. My bad luck follows me everywhere, right? That's taking permanent and personal and pervasive beliefs and assigning them to negative events. But I got a question for you. What if you had a negative event and instead of assigning P words to it, you assigned I words to it? And I'll do them again. Impermanent, impersonal, and isolated. So something bad happens and you say, that was odd. Well, that's not going to happen again. Instead of, well, there I go again. That's my life story, right?
Right.
So that's the whole thing about just working on yourself and understanding that events happen. They're all every day things happen to you. An event happens. The question is whether you want to call them a bad event or a good event. Okay, let's call them a bad event. You have a bad event. Are you going to lean on that and just keep going at it permanently and thinking it's personal and it's throughout everything in your life? Or that bad event happens and you're going to say, I'm just going to I'm going to say that happened. What do I do now to change that? How do I make that impermanent? How do I make that isolated? How do I make sure that I go on and I take that and make sure it's not impersonal? It's not personal. It's impersonal. I mean, okay. So that's the first thing about what do you say when you talk to yourself? That's part of the peak program that we get people to think about that.
Oh, man. Ty, can you think of any calls early on in your life you wish that you could have rethought the outcome and changed that P to an I? I don't know. I don't. I know there were times where I was not sure of how to confront my customer, and that takes time to learn. I mean, and it's hard to teach a student that. You ever use any examples in the classroom of ways to relook at uh, situations?
For me,
Yeah,
I mean, I'm always looking at ways of presenting situations and ideas and giving scenarios to students for them to figure out how to work through a problem, and then also keep them motivated in class to because they're having to overcome a lot. There's a reason they're in school, so they're having to overcome a lot all the time, anyways. So, sometimes just trying to get them to come back to school for just one more day. It comes
right.
down to those that mindset, the growth
Yeah.
mindset.
And developing that is a skill. I mean, it's not something that always comes naturally. Sometimes we have to give that additional coaching, and that's really what we're diving in, is to understand those differences.
So, like you're saying, if we're going to grow, if we're going to keep on growing, and we're going to be able to succeed and enjoy. Yeah, anybody here other than me old enough to remember when a lot of people believed that work was some slog that we just had to go through, and now it's a completely. I mean, I know younger people today don't even remember anyway that any part of that where work used to be something. Oh, that's something you have to do. Get that out of the way so you can finally live, right?
I wonder
And
if the Industrial Revolution really brought that, because so many people went from community work into industrial work. And
mhm.
I think that had created a mind shift. And yeah, I see that as well, that we're starting to relook at work and that work-life balance. We never talked about work-life balance when I was going through school, and now that is becoming a much more common conversation to have. I think I wish I would have had that back in the day, and was told that 80 and 90 hours a week isn't healthy.
If you're working that many hours a week, you need to rethink what your focus. That's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. 95 and a half was the most I ever clocked in 1 week when I was a service technician. Um, yeah, but those are the things that we do need to be able to help teach our students in the classroom,
Hmm.
and be prepared for that.
Right. And there you've got the slide up now. Like I said, going back to the whole foundation of this thing. If you're being a professional, you're always doing the best you can do. And that means that you can't just sit there and worry. You have to take action. And by the way, when you take action, sometimes you're going to make a mistake.
Yeah,
But that doesn't mean that's the end of the world. You can adjust then. Go back to that. Is that going to be a permanent or impermanent thing, right? You're going to adjust from that and go on, and then just keep on pursuing. Just keep do the best job you can do. And the focus of the peak program is not necessarily only taking that philosophy and applying it to be a better technician. In other words, a better troubleshooter, or learning better to read schematic diagrams, or whatever. That's really not the limited focus. The main focus it is, how do you make sure that you developing in your abilities to be able to communicate with the customer and understand what your task is as a technician, is providing customer service. As a matter of fact, I've got a real simple way. I want to show you something here. I've
okay.
got a real simple way that if you have a group of people that you're trying to get them to understand customer service, I want you to take a look at this right here. This is one of the tools that we use, okay? One of the tools that we use is, we're going to tell you what your personal policy is going to be, or even your business policy is going to be, and we're going to put it in a nutshell. By the way, when you hear people talk about policy manuals, how big are they? How many pages are they? chapters and verse and do this and do this. Okay, but here's what we're going to do. This is a nice trick that you can do with a group of people to get them to understand customer service. And you can see what I have here. What I have here is a 3x5 index card. Okay. And what I want you to understand is what we're going to do here is we're going to show you completely what you need to know as a technician to provide outstanding customer service. And basically what we do in our workshops is we sit people down and we have them make one of these up. Okay. So we sit them down and we say, okay, do this. Take your 3x5 card and I want you to write on it. Side 1, provide outstanding customer service. Okay. Then once we get that done, then we say, now flip the card over, and I want you to write side 2, use your own best judgment in any situation. Okay, so here's the question. Let's say that you're trying to get technicians how to understand how to make sure that they're handling customer service correctly, and the questions come up. And you say, well, here's what you're going to do. You're in a specific situation. What are you going to do? Well, you're going to do what? Do your best to provide outstanding customer service, right?
Should be our first step.
And then what happens is when you're explaining this to technicians, then they go, you get what I call the yeah buts. You know what yeah buts are?
Yeah, but
Yeah, but then what if the customer something? Turn the card around and use your own best judgment in any situation. And then you get another yeah, but. Well, yeah, but what if? Turn the card around and make sure this is what you're doing. You see what I'm saying? That's how simple it is.
I love that. That's an easy tool.
And what happens is no matter what the yabbit is in the workshop about, well, what if the customer says, oh, and by the way, I should mention this also, is that sometimes this part here, using your own best judgment in any situation, is not handling it totally on your own. That's what a service manager is for. Or maybe that's what your dispatcher is about, to help you get me information so that you can do the right thing. So it doesn't mean that we're saying technicians need to be out there all by themselves handling customer service and they're just out there making decisions that are going to may have terrible repercussions. We're not saying that. We're saying that part of using your own best judgment in any situation may in fact be getting a hold of your service manager or your dispatcher or someone else to find out what they recommend that you do. So that's one element of peak performance, is doing customer service and making sure that you're doing the best that you can.
Yeah, absolutely. And, a lot of people don't think about that side of our education. And if we're failing to prepare our students for life as a technician that is implementing customer service, we're actually failing the program. So we see a lot of curriculums, a lot of programs implementing more of that side of the education just to make sure that they understand what work life is once they get out into that field.
You got the chapters up there now, and basically, like I said, it's an 8-chapter text, and we start out with what is a professional. And one of the issues that I found when I worked with students over the years and graduates over the years, and then also working with technicians already out in the field, I know this is going to sound a little tough to take, but there were a lot of times that technicians would come to me and say, I get the feeling that when I go to certain situations and I'm doing my job, that people look down on me because of the kind of work that I do. I don't know if you've ever experienced that sort of thing, but when you got people who work with their hands, as we say, sometimes certain people in society, and they're all wrong about it, obviously, right?
Yeah, they're fixing the things that keep them comfortable in their own.
Right. But somehow, they here's what they do. They look at a situation where somebody might have a master's degree in education and they do a certain kind of work, and that's fine, okay? And then someone may not have a master's degree at all. Maybe they only have an associate degree in HVAC, okay? Because that's all they needed to get them started, and then, of course, they get out and get their field experience also. But somehow some people look at people who do things a little bit differently, they do their job a little differently, and they look down on them. As a matter of fact, there's a story that I was giving a talk at a convention some years ago, And the topic that I was talking about was how technicians need to be professional.
Hmm.
And I finished my talk and started to get back to my seat. And before I even got to sit down, this gentleman came over to talk to me. Now, when that happens, when somebody says, I need to talk to you, right, and I haven't even gotten down off the podium yet, I know one of two things has happened. Either that individual has something he wants to disagree with me about, and he wants to deal with it right away, or there's something that's very personal to that person that they want to tell me. In this case, he didn't disagree with me. He wanted to tell me about a situation that had come up. Well, he was a technician, and he had been for many years. He was self-employed. He was doing very well for his family, and he had established customers on a regular basis. And one day he was called to go to a customer's house to work on a piece of equipment, and he was there working on the equipment. And what happened was, while he was working on the equipment, the woman, a son, came home from school, and she was having a discussion with him, making sure that before he went out and started running around, do whatever they want to do,
Mm-hmm.
he needed to get his homework done.
Sure.
And he didn't want to, obviously. You know, kids come home from school, they don't really want to go out and do homework the first thing. So they were having this argument, this discussion in the dining room, and our technician was off in a different part of the house working on the equipment. Well, he could overhear what was going on, and it was, well, I don't want to, and you have to, you do this and you do that, and you got to be able to do your homework, and you got to make sure you do well in school, and the whole discussion. And then this is what this fellow wanted to tell me, was that he couldn't believe what he heard. The woman said that she hit on an idea. He thought she hit on an idea of how she could make sure that her son knew how important it was for him to get his homework done. She pointed in the direction of the technician working on her equipment and said to her son, "Do you want to wind up like him?" And that was one of the most, how can I say this, most emotional stories. This fellow actually got tears in his eyes when he was telling me this story. And he said, and by the way, I had questions right away. What did you do when somebody said something like that? And after he got a little bit calmed down, he told me, well, he said, I finished the job, and by the way, I didn't double the price, or I didn't walk out in the middle of it or anything like that. I finished the job, I got it done, and I vowed never to go back to that person's house again. But it was one of the stories that I've been told. That's just one of the several stories that I've been told when technicians are working on customers' things, how customers may not look upon them as being, what do you want to call it, as educated or sophisticated or all those things, right? And when in fact, today's technician, how sophisticated or how educated does today's technician have to be?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's those encounters that I think, as an educator, it's important to share to help them understand. How do you respond in those incidents? What is the action command? And it is a life lesson.
Well, his response was he never said a word to the customer about it. He just did his job, finished installing the parts, wrote the job up, and like I said, the one thing he didn't say to her, but he did vow he was never going to go back to that house again.
Sure.
But I do hear that from time to time. So that's just one aspect of the book. And if you take a look at the chapters, tools for success is basically goal setting, making sure that you sit down. A lot of people don't even stop to think about it, that if you don't take the time to really decide what you want and then write it down so that you can follow that, you know what I mean? Follow a plan to make sure you get that done. That's just, a lot of folks don't understand that's a process. That if you write things down, if you make a plan, if you follow through. And then there's another idea about that I want to talk to you a little bit about. Is part that's in the program, is that if you take the time to write something down and focus and decide, let's just say decide what you want. The question I have for you, has you ever heard of something called a reticular activating system?
I don't think I have.
A reticular activating system Okay, first of all, the word reticular is basically a Latin term, and it comes from that language, and basically it means net or net-like. Okay, so basically, one of the real tools for success in setting goals is very simply this: is that your reticular activating system, once you decide what you want, all of a sudden catches things in your process or in your sight line that you really didn't even know they were there, because you've decided something specific. These resources that are out there all of a sudden become more apparent to you. So your reticular activating system, what it does, and this is part of what we explain in the book, but also in the PowerPoint and in the facilitator resources, that you want to explain to people that setting goals means that their reticular activating system kicks in, and what they're able to do then is focus on the resources. They're always there. Those resources are always there.
Right.
But if you don't focus on a goal, you may miss them. And that's basically what it is. And the thing that follows up, the thing that we discuss in that particular chapter again also, is that not only does this thing called your reticular activating system come to work for you, and what it does is it eliminates something else. There's a problem that people have if they don't set goals and if they don't get things specific. There's another Greek term. It's called a scotoma. Now, if you've ever heard of that one, okay, scotoma, when you translate that from Greek, basically means blind spot. So the two things go together. So basically, if you have a scotoma about something that you can't see because you have not set a goal and got your reticular activating system working, you're going to miss that resource. But when you get your RAS working, as we like to call it, gets your RAS working, okay, then what happens is that thing becomes apparent to you. So that's just one part of the second chapter.
Okay. Very, very interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I'm looking forward to spending some time diving deeper into it. I've grabbed different pieces out of the book in preparation for this, and that was one that I missed. So I'm going to have to absolutely come back to that one. All right. So let me
There you go.
Yeah. This one, I seen it in there and I didn't get to it. I got to the snobs part.
Right, right. Well, that's the other thing. That whole idea. Remember, I was telling you that part of that idea that technicians need to understand that people are not looking down on them, and that's not the way it is anymore. But we do talk about this issue. I'm not sure if you know the origin of the term snob.
No, I didn't.
Okay. Basically, it goes all the way back to the 17th century, when the church at the time decided that there weren't enough people attending college from the people that they just called commoners. So what they did was they went to the universities and they said, we need to start enrolling some of these people who are not necessarily from nobility, like most people that were getting an education back in those days. So what they said is we need to enroll these people and get them through the university and get them educated. Well, the professors weren't too sure about that. The professors were academics, and for them to take on someone who they considered to be not necessarily of nobility, why, they didn't think that they were going to succeed. So what they did was, when they registered someone, they made the note sine nobilia next to their name. And that was their secret code to know that that person wasn't of nobility, and they were expected to fail. And of course, sine nobilius, or sine nobilia, however you want to pronounce it, became shortened to SNOB. They didn't have to spell it out. Okay, so that's the word where this word snob came from. Okay, and the shorthand, like I said, came about. And what happened in the end, though, is that the professors were very surprised, because the lion's share of these people that they enrolled and labeled with the snob label, that were probably not going to be able to finish school, a very high percentage of them finished school. And so the term, we know it today, we know what a snob is like. That's a whole different idea. Somebody who thinks they should be looking down at someone, that sort of thing. But that's basically how it got started. So I'm happy to say, though, that that they found out very quickly that these people were not to be looked down on. That was the best part about that. Okay, this picture here. Let me ask you what you see there.
Looks like a lady turning her head with a feather in her hair, maybe.
Right, you're right. You do see that. But there's another thing to see. Now, here's the thing. What you see there, because of your background and experience, is, I guess, let's call it a stylish young lady looking away. She's got a feather in her cap, okay? And you can see what basically is her chin line and what looks like maybe a little bit of an eyebrow there, okay? Mm-hmm. Okay. And then you can see her necklace around her neck. Mm-hmm. And then you can see that big furry thing that she's got on there. Mm-hmm. Okay. I want you to shift your gaze, and I want you to take a different look, and I want you to look at that, what you're looking at as a necklace, and it's not a necklace. It's an older lady's mouth, very tightly closed. And the chin,
I see.
The chin is not a chin. It's an older lady's nose.
Wow, looking down.
And she's looking down, and she has, and by the way, the point about this one, the reason I like this one here is because mostly people that are, if we want to call them a little bit younger, that's fine, because obviously you're a little bit younger than I am. But when we get people from my generation, the first one they see is not the one you see.
Really?
The first one is because of this. Okay, when you had neighborhoods back east where most of our people were from, obviously, and back in those days, we had neighborhoods that we had a lot of immigrants, and a lot of those immigrants were European. Okay, we had what we called Little Italy, Little Russia. Okay, a little France. In other words, we had immigrants from all over Europe, and a lot of the immigrants, especially the Polish ones, had a scarf on a lot of the times, and they referred to that as a babushka. That's what they called it. And that's what that scarf is. And so when I look at that thing the first time, what I see is a lady in a babushka, because that's where I came from. And for me, I have to shift my gaze in order to be able to see the younger lady. Whereas when you started out, when you took a look at that picture right there, you saw a young lady dressed up, to look like maybe she's going to the theater or something like that, right? And she was young and stylish with the feather and all that sort of thing. So one of the things we do in the workshops that are related to the facilitator guide is to get students to take a look at this, and again, just like you did, make a guess at what you see, and then talk about it so that you can see things, and this is the important part, from another perspective.
Wow, now we're getting somewhere.
That one's so much fun, isn't it?
That's a great classroom example, and especially like you mentioned, when you're presenting it in the classroom, you can't give away too much, and that's where the facilitator guides come in handy.
Right.
Additional content to be able to present it from a different, deeper perspective.
Well, here's the thing. In the textbook, we're not even talking about scotomas. Yeah. We do talk about reticular activating system, so people know what that is, but we don't even talk about scotomas in the textbook. When we talk about it is when the facilitator brings someone in and says, okay, you learned about your reticular activating system. What I want you to understand now is something new information that I want you to learn. We're going to talk about scotomas. Okay? In other words, the facilitator is the one that brings this to fore for the student. The student has no idea, after reading the chapter and getting nothing but reticular activating system understood, what the scotoma part is about. And that's what the facilitator brings to it.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. I can truly appreciate that, because it's, it's bringing a different type of education into the classroom, and it's making them think.
Mm-hmm. And of course, it does go on the reticular, or then the facilitator also reviews what the reticular activating system is about, and goes through that. Well, and that's part of the PowerPoint also.
Sure,
so.
Absolutely.
Oh, if you read this real quickly and then look away, real quick. Now what'd you read?
Paris in the Spring.
Mm-hmm. Look closely. Look at it. Do it slower.
Paris in. Oh my gosh. Okay.
This one is to get people to understand that sometimes we get stuck in a mode of comfort about things. And by the way, how many times do you think maybe the two of us throughout our lifetime have heard the phrase Paris in the spring?
Sure, many.
That so we think we know it, and the minute we see it, we go as far as Paris in, and we're done. Let's move on. We've already figured this out. Whereas what this is getting is the illustration that people need to understand. Just because you think you have something figured out, take your time and go back through it to make sure that you're correct. So that's another one of those. And by the way, there's several more tools beyond what we're seeing here that are in the resource guide. But it's actually a lot of fun to
Yeah.
watch people go through that.
Oh,
It
I'm
really
enjoying this
is.
myself. I knew that there were some things that I wanted to prep on, but some things that I wanted to leave alone. And so that was a perfect example of that.
So this is the other part of it where they tie together the idea of if you set goals, your reticular activating system kicks in, your scotomas go away, and then of course you've probably seen this reference before also, that once you get students to understand that part of their life is setting goals, it's a smart thing to do because they're specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. In other words, we understand the process of setting a goal, writing it down, making it specific. And by the way, you can't just say, well, I want to make $1 million. That's not a specific goal. A specific goal means by the end of the next fiscal year, I want to have a savings account with X amount of dollars in it. And this is how I'm going to achieve it. Okay. So this is the other thing that we go over with students is on this that are going through the program, that if you're going to set goals, you got to make sure you're being specific about it. And you got to make sure that, first of all, it's realistic, right? And relevant and achievable and measurable and all those sorts of things. So this is another part of the PowerPoint that the facilitator has after the student has gone through and read the accompanying chapters. And a couple other things about that reticular activating system that I just wanted to throw out there, just it's a little bit of fun. There was a situation some years ago that it was decided that we needed to get another car. Okay, we needed a second vehicle. And my wife, Peggy, she's the one who said she was going to be driving the car. So we went car shopping. And it didn't need to be a new car. So we went to, have you ever bought a resale car from like a rental company? They only run them for so many thousand miles or whatever. And because of maintenance costs, they turn them out and they sell them.
Yep.
Well, so we went to a budget resale outfit. And we looked at several vehicles, and oh, this one won't do, that one won't do. And then they brought out this car, and we got into it, and it was like instantly, it was, well, this is the one. Okay, done deal. We take the car, and I'm going to tell you this. This is the absolute truth. This particular car was what they called a Dodge Spirit. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that's a model of car. I was not. I'd never seen a Dodge Spirit. I didn't know. And by the way, I thought maybe that they were just built for fleet use until they got sold to the public. I mean, that sort of thing. Well, so we bought the car, and guess what I noticed all of a sudden going down the street? Other Dodge Spirits. Some of them they were there all the time. They were there, but I never saw them.
Because I have experienced it like every time I buy a vehicle. You're right.
Every time I never saw them before. But here's the thing. Once I invested some of my hard-earned money in one, they were important to me and I could see them. And by the way, later on, talking about vehicles, some years later on, decided to buy a Chevy Suburban. And of course, that's I was even familiar with that vehicle, but then I noticed that there was a lot more of them around than I ever saw before once I owned one. Yeah. I didn't realize there was that many of them around. So that's another way your reticular activating system works. Once you decide something's important to you, you begin to notice that it's there. Okay?
Got it.
All right.
Man, there's so much content we can dive into. We're only a portion of the way that we had planned on getting through here. And I think we'll probably detour for a minute. I encourage all of you to dive deeper into peak performance for the professional technician. It's a lot of curriculum for your classroom. As educators, we're always looking for complete curriculum packages that can bring a topic into the classroom and bring it to life. And as we start having those conversations about soft skills in the classrooms, here it is. And so I encourage you to go over to our website. Just if you haven't been over there in a while, just hop on escogroup.org, head on over to the bookstore and the e-learning site, and you will find all of that. The reason I wanted to shift gauges for just a minute. Well, two things actually, but one, let's talk about another training perspective, a
Mhm.
whole other training curriculum that you work with that dives into other aspects of becoming a educator. And I think there's a lot of people out here that are making that transition or have recently made that transition. So let's talk about some other ways to help in that transition of becoming an educator.
Well, what you've got up there is from what we call the working title for that program, which is in its stages of development right now, is called From Technician to Educator. And the difference in thinking about it that way is people work as a technician for years, and then maybe they get into service management, so they learn a little bit about working with people and leading people, if you want to think about it that way, from a
Right.
supervisory perspective. And it's kind of natural to think about it from there and think, well, maybe this could now lead me into teaching, and teaching is what we usually call it. And that's fine, that if you went from being a technician in the field and then you went to work as a teacher and someone else developed the curriculum, someone else gave you all the tools that you need, someone handed you a daily lesson plan, someone gave you all the information you need to present, for example, here's how you read schematic diagrams and here's how you use a meter, or here's how whatever. The technician to educator program is a different in scope because we're saying you as going to be leaving as an instructor and you're going to become a teacher, but you're going beyond that because you're not going to be only a teacher. You're going to be what we refer to as an educator. And as an educator, you have a much better understanding about how people learn effectively, and what are barriers to people's ability to learn effectively. So that's basically what this is, the beginning of this project here.
I wish I would have learned this a long time ago, to be honest with you. So after recently learning about the tools, particularly like through Bloom's taxonomy and communicating and writing and drafting, I now recognize that I was a teacher most of my time in the
Hmm.
classroom, not understanding what it means to become an educator. Can you give us we've got about 9 minutes left. Can you give us a brief breakdown of what Bloom's taxonomy means and how it can help us move from a instructor to an educator?
Well, if you're taking a look at the platform there, like you could say, if you start things at the very bottom, let's just go right to the bottom where it just says remember. Okay, you can be a teacher and you can sit someone down and say, okay, let's just say you're going to teach them the fundamentals of refrigeration, right? And here's the four components. You got a compressor, you got a condenser, you got an evaporator, got a metering device, and they got names, and you show them pictures, and they understand, okay, those are the four parts. Okay, that's fine. But that's all they know. They can remember that you called them those things. And if you explain to them what they do, they can remember what those things do. But when you start moving into Bloom's taxonomy and you go up the pyramid, if you just keep going up and say, understand, now you're talking about taking those four components and explaining them more in detail, not just what they are individually, but how they work together to accomplish heat transfer. Let's say that's the example. Okay? As simple as saying that, well, if you have a refrigeration system and let's just say it's a reach-in refrigerator or something like, a reach-in in a convenience store, and it's a beverage box and it maintains somewhere between 38 and 42 degrees Fahrenheit. And it does that by, having a fan motor that circulates the air along with now they're starting to understand how the refrigeration system does some of it work, because now we're getting in not just the refrigeration system and the chemicals, and all the things that we're teaching them there about temperature, pressure, and that sort of thing. Now we're talking about airflow, right? And how does it apply and make that work in a very specific situation? And then you keep moving up the pyramid. Okay, how do we apply that? Well, what if you take that simple refrigeration system that you learned and you've gone beyond understanding, and we now applied it to a specific use, right? Now that we understand, and this is a key, if you're going to be able to fix something, if you're going to be able to troubleshoot something, if you're going to be able to evaluate something, I have a question for you. And that question is, how are you ever going to know what's wrong with something if you don't know what right is in the first place? And that's where we get into going beyond applying that knowledge and using it to evaluate on that simple build on the refrigeration system itself, right? How does it work on a specific piece of equipment? And then, of course, once we get into an analysis and evaluating, then we get to the very top. My favorite part. My favorite part of Bloom's taxonomy is now we've got this individual that we took from the very bottom of the pyramid, took him or her steps on through this, and now they can actually probably teach someone else about this stuff, explain it to them. And they would then be going back down to where? Back down to their first part of the pyramid, the very foundation, and using all the knowledge that they have all the way up through analyzing, evaluating, and creating, so that they can go back down to how can I make sure someone remembers what this is about. So that's just one way to look at it. I know you have some more experience with it.
No, I'm just really getting comfortable. And this last year is where I've been spending time with this. Eugene Silverstein and Renee Tomlinson from my own team
Right.
has been
Mm-hmm.
helping me understand this. And when I look at myself as a technician, I feel like I was a very good technician. I could create products if I needed to. I had acquired that level of skill as a technician. And when I got into the classroom, I found myself teaching many at that level, not recognizing it is the most important fact of teaching is understanding the level of the learner.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Where are they? I can't help get them to the next step until I know where they are. If they are at the point where they have learned enough and they say, I've learned all sorts of things about this particular refrigeration circuit, and I can explain some of it, and I can even solve some problems, and I can go, okay, I kind of have an understanding where you are. You might need to learn how to analyze what's going on with this system in your next phase of your education. And they go, that's what I need. I'm missing that. I haven't got to that level. And if I would have been skipping it and the whole evaluation side and going straight up to the creating side, as if I assumed that they had made it up that pyramid, I may have lost them as I was trying to get them to the top.
And that's what the technician to educator program is going to be. Basically, it's a 10, if you want to refer to them as chapters, I prefer to refer to them as modules.
Okay, sure.
Because what that means is the individual that's using this text is not just reading a text. The individual that's participating in the technician to educator program is basically learning from the first module is developing performance objectives. And because where do you need to begin?
Where do you start?
That's where you need to start, is what is it that my students, and not just be able to remember, but what is it that my students are going to be able to do once we get through a lesson, a specific lesson, whether it's mechanical or electrical or whatever it might be, okay? And then we move on through more into the program and get all the way through not just developing performance objectives, but developing a simple one-session lesson plan. And I mean detailed, so that you know exactly what you're doing, what resources do you need to make it work. You know, the kind of thing that a curriculum developer, someone who does nothing but that, will hand to a trade school instructor and say, here's your module for this week, or if it's a term, a longer term, a term or a phase, or sometimes they refer to them, or here's your entire semester right here, and here's the daily things that are in it, and then this is what you accomplish by midterm and all that sort of thing. So basically, the technician to educator program says you, as the educator, the person who's not only delivering the information, but the person who's also building everything that goes into delivering the information. So that's basically what it's about.
Yeah, that's a big thing. It is the tool that can move you from a instructor into an educator and understanding the level of education of your students. So yeah, this is one page of an incredibly important curriculum that I'm looking forward to seeing that.
And once we get, and then, like I said, writing exams. And by the way, what goes beyond? What is beyond for an educator, not for an instructor, But what goes beyond for an educator, just working with the students? How about working with placement and all those things that goes along with it?
Exactly. That next level of
Right.
program.
Advisory boards. If you're an instructor, you're working with advisory boards. You should be. Let me put it that way. Yeah.
100%. All right. Wow. That brought us right to the top of the hour.
Wow.
So grateful to have you here with us today.
Glad to be here.
And, there's so much we can dive deeper into. We just try to grab some pieces to introduce you into, ways to help introduce these into your professional development,
Mhm.
your own peak performance, as well as those that are in our classroom. And if I'm a contractor, my own staff,
Right.
ways that I
Right.
can develop internally. I congratulate you for being one of the top 25 not most nominated influencers.
Wow, that's something. Wow, that's all I got to say about that.
And so those were nominations that came in from the industry, and the top 25
Yeah.
of highest numbers were calculated, and Jim Johnson is right in that list. And we will see you at the National HVACR Education Conference. We encourage you to come get to know Jim a little bit better. I mean, that's where you get a chance to sit down and talk and go, I was really intrigued with this. Where did this come from?
Mhm.
I could really use this. And I'm looking forward to it. I can't wait to see you there.
Yeah. All righty.
All right. Well, we appreciate everyone joining us today. We look forward to more conversations. We'll see you all next week again on Did You Know, the ESCO HVAC show. Bye, everybody.
Good to be with you.